I've been told that it's less distracting if I slide my papers over instead of flipping them. Who knows what'll happen? But that's part of my goal. But anyway, good morning and welcome. My name is Craig Devenport, and I'm a member of the preaching team here at the church. And I'd like to welcome you again both to the service here as well as our live stream. Now, my kids used to tell me just to give the short version of a story, that I talk too much. The short version is that I'm going to tell you about the fifth commandment. The long version is that by the end of the sermon, you'll know where it comes from, why it was written, who wrote it, and what it really means. To put in perspective, the fifth commandment is only one of the 10 commandments given by God to the people of Israel through Moses in the book of Exodus. Now, the book of Exodus is only the second book in the Old Testament, right after Genesis and right before Leviticus. The reason that I mention this is that they were all primarily written by Moses during his 120-year lifetime. As a side note, he did not die of old age. Now, the book of Exodus tells us of the escape from Egypt by the Israelites and sets forth a listing of ways that the people can come to strengthen their relationship with God. The 10 commandments. They have punishments attached to them, such as commandment 2 and 3 as examples. Also, these commands summarize and they introduced the remaining 603, and some of those commands also have punishments. But the 10 introduce the stipulations of the covenant, state the blessings and sanctions of the covenant as listed in Deuteronomy 27 and 28. They're more like critical instructions for life. While many commandments do have the punishments attached to them, they are not meant to be only punitive. At this point, God was establishing Israel as his kingdom on earth. He called them to reflect the ways of heaven on earth. Now, these instructions with the punishments were designed for their own good. Israel did well when she paid attention and was following these instructions. But even in her wealthiest days, life was not so good in Israel when she failed to follow God's instructions summarized in these commands. Now, as you've seen from the benediction that we've been saying at the end of each service each week, there are indeed 10 commandments. Now, the first 4 instruct us how to have a better relationship with God. Have no gods before me, other gods before me. Do not make graven images. Do not use my name in vain. And remember the Sabbath and keep it holy. The last 5 instruct us how to have a better relationship with people by stating, don't murder, don't commit adultery, don't steal, don't lie, and do not covet. Now, the linchpin or the link between these is the 5th commandment. Honor your father and your mother, that your days may be long in the land which the Lord your God gives to you. It is the only commandment that has a promise attached to it. God is truly the God of the universe. And as you can see by the title of my sermon, Live Long and Prosper, this comes from Mr. Spock on the planet Vulcan from the Star Trek saga with his famous parting. That's said to him throughout the series as he exists from the scene. His statement is a positive one as you continually look to the future. While it's not a promise of any kind, it does seem intended for us to pause for a moment. There are good things put before us. I admit it's a stretch. But I interpreted this as being very similar to the promise God made to us in the 5th commandment, Honor your father and your mother, so that, a term that Mike likes to use a lot, so that you may live long and may it go well with you in the land. Various versions of the Bible state it similarly. One says that your days may be long in the land which the Lord has given you, that you may have a good long life in the land your God has given you, that your days may be long upon the land which the Lord thy God giveth thee. Now, many of us are of the age to remember the movie, The Ten Commandments, and visualize the actor Charlton Heston, who plays Moses, coming down to meet the people after being on Mount Sinai, holding two large stone tablets upon which the commandments were inscribed. When I first wrote this, my spell check changed it to Charleston Heston, but we got that fixed. The people present were terrified when Moses came down for at least a couple of reasons. First, they didn't know what Moses was doing up there. He knew that he was supposed to go, but they didn't know what the end result was going to be. So that kind of instilled fear in them. But secondly, it's one of the only times when God spoke directly to the people, not through somebody else. That you are to obey them out of your love for God. Now, one author that I came across theorized that all 10 commandments were written on a single stone tablet and that God made 2 copies, one for them to have readily available and one to put into the Ark of the Covenant. Others think that the first 4 were on one tablet and the rest were on the other. While the most recent ancient Near East studies favor the first theory. While the people kept one tablet, the other was in the ark, as if God himself was holding on to that copy. You can think of it like a contract between 2 parties. Each party gets a copy. God will always be faithful in keeping his end of the deal. That is why he would later send Jesus. Now, despite the majority of the commandments being very straightforward and true, the 5th commandment is less clear in some people's mind. What does it mean to honor your parents? What if my parents are dishonorable? What if my parents don't live together? Can I stop honoring my parents when I become a parent? Does that mean that I should not honor my grandparents? Or what if I don't live with my parents? And what if I don't know who my parents are? Well, it all boils down to discovering what honor means. And sometimes it's easier to understand what honor is not. It is not unquestioning obedience. It is not pleasing. It is not praising. It's not being kind. It's not providing for. It's not being courteous. The ESV Study Bible says that the word honor means to treat someone with the proper respect due to the person and their role. Now, the Bible actually states that parents can hand over an insufferably rebellious son to stoning, as listed in Deuteronomy. But it's unlikely that any parent took advantage of this. But nevertheless, the commandment showed the seriousness of dishonoring one's parents. Now, Jesus is flawless and therefore pretty easy to honor. Yet he strayed from his parents when he stayed behind at the temple without telling them where he was. Now, another example of many were challenges David faced when Saul tried to kill him, which brought about disobeying events. So the only thing that supersedes our commitment to honor our parents is to honor God. Thus, Jesus went to the temple because it was, as he said, his Father's house. And David, even though he was remarkably honoring to his depraved king, did at times disobey him in order to honor God over the king. Our commitment to God supersedes our commitment to people, including parents. Now, it's much easier to think of honoring God and Jesus because of their perfection. But how do I honor my parents who are filled with flaws? Shouldn't I be honoring those who really deserve it? With the exception of your parents, I would generally say yes. Honoring your father and mother is a must according to God. The only time that is unacceptable is when they do something that is contrary to the will of God. If it comes to a choice between them and God being honored, always pick God. And there are numerous biblical references that support that. Now, I believe that one of the biggest stumbling blocks which prevents us from honoring our parents is forgiveness. Many equate forgiveness with forgetting. The goal in the process is to try not to let a memory become a focal point in your life. No one will forget about an event, but we can prevent it from consuming our thoughts. It sometimes happens when a person that you cannot forgive has no clue of what they did that even bothers you. Failing to forgive hurts you the most. Forgiving forever seems impossible. But I personally found that I could forgive someone for today, just today, which didn't seem so impossible. But I had to do that every day. And eventually I got to a point where I no longer needed to make myself forgive. My wife and I were watching TV the other night, a show called Longmire, which is, I won't go into the details, but we liked it. But anyway, there were some people somebody talking about forgiveness, about how they were going to forgive somebody. But he used a phrase that stuck with me. It says, forgiveness is a gift that you can give yourself. Now, a few years ago, I ran across a comment about this that also struck with me. It went something like this. If you are mad, upset, and unable to forgive someone, you're allowing them to control your emotions. Do not give them that power. Now, returning to the issue honoring your parents, what does it mean on a practical level? Well, accept that honoring your parents is also a way to honor God. Be intentional about attempting to honor them. Recognize that they will fail on occasion. If needed, begin to forgive them. A little at a time can go a long way. Pray for them. I mean, if we're supposed to pray for our enemies, least we could do is pray for our parents. Do not respond in kind. Rise above the discouraging event and ask God to help you set the example yourself. Ask God to forgive you and help you when you find yourself dishonoring your parents and speaking ill of them. Now, the fifth commandment, to honor your father and mother, is probably one of the most difficult commandments to follow. It's not an easy one that just seems to make sense and is easy to do. Think about it. As a parent or grandparent, are you setting the best example for your children to follow? Are you using the phrase, because I told you to, too much? As a parent, does honoring God give your children an example to honor you? And some of you are grandparents. Do you encourage your grandchildren to honor their parents? Or do you kind of meddle with your your own child's parental authority over their own children. Adults, have you taken the time needed to interact with your parents and grandparents? They are more than just a disruption in your life. God made them for the sole purpose of creating you and teaching you to honor him through them. Believe it or not, they were in your shoes once. Now let's go back to Jesus for a moment. And after his parents told him how distressed they were when he stayed at the temple, we are told in Luke 2:51 that he went down with them and came to Nazareth and was submissive to them. Yet, not only did Jesus honor his earthly parents, he also honored his Father in heaven. And in John 14:31, Jesus said, I do as the Father has commanded me, so that the world may know that I love the Father. Our salvation is actually dependent upon Jesus honoring his God in heaven. And remember in the garden, he said, yet not what I will, but what you will. If you ever have difficulty honoring your parents, or anyone in authority for that matter, put your eyes on Jesus. Confess your dishonoring attitude toward him. Know that he has already forgiven you, by having honored his Father in heaven and allowing himself to be dishonored by sinful people in your place. Then ask him to give you the power to do what he did. Give honor where honor is due. First to God, and then to your parents. So, honor your father and mother, and may you live long and prosper. Amen.